Okay, everyone, welcome to another episode of Car Coffee Chats with Caitlin. Again, I don't have coffee, but I do have a little viral nightcap, if you will. That's really good. So, what I did for my little viral nightcap, because it is indeed 6:30 p.m., is I did one of the poppy raspberry roses with tart cherry juice and the magnesium complex. But they didn't have any of the powders at my grocery stores, so I literally got the plastic pills and literally opened it and poured it in. And you're apparently supposed to have two, so I poured two of them in. But if you see me yawning, don't say anything. And it's definitely not about the topic because it's actually a topic I am very deeply interested in. All the topics I talk about I'm very deeply interested in. But this week's topic is the Bechdel Test, which if you don't know what the Bechdel Test is, you're going to learn today. So, we are going to kind of do a multi-part to this, if you will. We're going to do the Bechdel Test history and flaws, movies that pass and fail the Bechdel Test, and then Bechdel Test alternatives. That's going to kind of be the layout of this episode, if you will. So, first of all, what the heck is the Bechdel Test? The Bechdel Test is first appeared in a 1985 strip of Blank to Watch Out For. It is a derogatory term used for lesbians. You can probably figure that out based off of the name of Alison Bechdel and that. So I personally am not going to be stating it on this episode because I am not a part of that community. Therefore, I don't feel comfortable using that term, especially since it started out as a derogatory term. So, it was a long-running comic by cartoonist and writer Alison Bechdel, Fun Home. The comic depicts two queer women discussing movies, and one remarks that she will only see a film if it meets a certain set of requirements involving female characters. Though Bechdel described the test as, quote, a little lesbian joke in an alternative feminist newspaper, it entered into the critical conversation decades later as a barometer to use when thinking about gender representation in media. In addition to film, the test can be applied to video games, television shows, plays, and literature. So literally any media at all. Any form of media, the Bechdel test can be used to apply to. It is just most commonly applied to film, because of the fact that the cartoon comic strip, whatever you want to call it, originally applied it to a movie, a film, if you will. So, according to the original comic, the rules are the movie must have at least two women in it, the women must talk to each other, and they must talk to each other about something besides a man. So, if you think about it, it should be so easy to pass, but alas, a lot of movies actually very easily fail this test, even though it's a very simple test, if you will. People argue that you could, or I should say, critics have revised and updated the Bechdel test because they want to suggest that female characters should also be named and say more than 5 words to each other, and share more than a minute of screen time. But what I will say to that personally is why pour more salt in the wound if not that many movies pass this test in the first place. Unfortunately, it's the very sad, true state of affairs of the Bechdel test. Now, to get into the flaws of the Bechdel test is to also state that because of the very low barometer of this test, a lot of misogynist movies still pass this test with flying colors. And that being said, those movies can still not give a positive outlook or positive perspective on women. But again, still pass the test with flying colors because they talk about something together besides a man. And on the flip side, feminist-focused movies can also barely pass the test or not pass the test at all because it only features one woman, for example. Therefore, the pure fact that it only features one woman makes it not pass the Bechdel test. So both sides of the coin, you can see the flaws of the Bechdel test, if you will. And so within this, it also does not analyze any intersectionality by integrating race, sexuality, disability, or class, for that matter. It purely just bases it off of if you are a woman versus a man. Which, again, to give grace to the test, 1985 was significantly different than 2023. A lot of these articles that I'm mentioning that talk about the Bechdel test were written within the past year, like literally within 2023 and 2024. I can't believe I just realized I actually said that we're in 2023 and we're fully 4 months into 2024. 3.5 or 2.5 technically, but like my brain is already set on April because of the weather outside, if you can't tell by my t-shirt. So people argue that it's actually supposed to be a measure for an entire year of movies, but I personally can't find the interview where Alison Bechdel, not anyone else, I cannot find the interview where Alison Bechdel says it's supposed to be an analysis for a whole entire year of movies, not just individual movies. So if you are watching this and you're like, I know that she said that as a fact, and I know the exact article or the exact interview she said it in, please put it down below. And I will shut my mouth on that statement or argument, because I personally, while I was doing this research and while I was researching just within my own personal interest, I could never find the article where she said it was supposed to be for a whole year analysis, let alone the comic strip itself was talking specifically about a singular movie. So therefore, I cannot stand by the statement that it's supposed to be a year analysis test, not a singularity test, if you will. But again, if you all can find that and link it, then I will shut my mouth and I will admit that I'm wrong about it. But therefore, within even that statement, a year analysis, the year analysis is the sum of its parts, right? So you can't help but look at the year and the biggest movies of the year, for that matter, and say, well, did these movies pass that simple test? And I bring this up because the Oscar award for Best Motion Picture of the Year was just awarded to Oppenheimer, and Oppenheimer did not pass the Bechdel test. And so you look at what is awarded for Best Picture of the Year, right? And you see, okay, this is what all the other movies were held up to that standard, right? And so you're like, if movie of the year didn't even pass, then you're holding a very low standard in terms of female character development. Of course, you can have your own counter arguments with that, to which I could counter argue the fact that there were females involved in Oppenheimer's atomic bomb project and after he had the project, and Strauss for that matter, and they were just simply wiped from history because of how it was written and how it was directed, the movie, because there were even mentions in the book and storylines in the book with conversations that were held with these individuals where they were just completely erased, for that matter. And so, all that being said, BBC did an analysis of Oscar Best Picture winners between 1929 and 2017 and found that less than half of those movies passed the Bechdel test. And so since it was in 2017, I thought I would update you on movies since, because I want to be fair, obviously. Movies since that have won Best Picture, and as I told you, 2023, Oppenheimer failed. 2024, Oppenheimer failed. 2023 was Everything Everywhere All at Once. That passed. 2022 was Coda, and that passed. 2021 was Nomadland, and that passed. 2020 was Parasite, and that passed. 2019 was Green Book, and that failed. And 2018, The Shape of Water, and that passed. So again, it didn't list the specific number or the specific percentage that made it below 50%. Therefore, with these updated numbers, I don't know if it's now above 50%. So take that statistic with a grain of salt. That is why I listed the update since 2017, what numbers failed. And the Oscars have been around since 1929, so I'm not going to sit here and list every single movie since 1929 on which passed and which failed the Bechdel test, because I would be here for 12 hours if that were the case. Obviously, I'm over exaggerating, but you get the point. So, I was worried that I wasn't recording for a hot second. I was like, that would be very interesting if I wasn't recording the audio this whole entire time. So, with all that being said, I have a very short list of movies that have passed and failed the Bechdel test. So, movies that have failed is Breakfast at Tiffany's, the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Zero Dark 30, The Avengers, and I listed Oppenheimer, but I think that's beating a dead horse at this point. Saying that Oppenheimer failed. Like, I've already said it like 5 times. I don't think I need to say it anymore. And movies that have passed, and I specifically put movies that passed that showcases the flaws, if you will, of the Bechdel test, because it doesn't really show a strong female character. If you get what I'm saying. When I say if you get what I'm saying, I guess I should explain that, since this is literally a podcast. But I feel like a strong female character, it has all of the characteristics defined and thought through, besides the fact that she's attracted to a man or has something to offer a man. Therefore, she's more thought out. She has more descriptors. She has more characteristics. She has more personality than what she has to offer a man. Therefore, here are some movies that pass that kind of show the flaws of the Bechdel test. Weird Science from 1985, Goodfellas, Showgirls, American Pie 2, and Twilight. Those are some movies that pass the Bechdel test. And if you think about it, Twilight, I'm not going to shame Twilight, because I know my 2 best friends love the Twilight series, even though I'm not a fan of it. It's literally about a girl in a love triangle. And again, I'm not going to shame it, because a lot of people love that series, so I'm not going to even approach that. But yeah, but something I do want to note is also all of Harry Potter, because a lot of people will argue that again, I'm beating a dead horse with Oppenheimer, but with Oppenheimer, a lot of people argue, well, it's a biopic about a man. And so with that, I argue there are actually a list of biopics about men that pass the Bechdel test. Just a few to mention is The King's Speech. I'm blanking on all the other ones, but I literally did my own research, because I was to be quite frank, I was arguing with someone in a comment section about the Bechdel test. And so, and biopics that have passed in the past, that are about men. And so they were saying, well, it's about a man, so why should it pass? Which is just a very shallow statement in and of itself, which I won't even get into. So, the biopics, however you want to say it, that have passed the Bechdel test, that are about men. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Oh my gosh, I hate when I have a long comment thread, because then okay. Movies that are primarily about men that pass the Bechdel test, that are biopics, however the hell you want to say it. Apollo 13, Schindler's List, 12 Years a Slave, Lincoln, and the King's Speech. And that was literally within 5 minutes of research, of personal research. I was able to figure that out. So with all that being said, there is no excuse in my mind. Especially when there were women involved within the atomic bomb and all of literally every single part of the process of that movie. Anyways, getting back to what I was saying is something I wanted to mention was Harry Potter, all of the films except Goblet of Fire, funny enough, which a lot of people actually do talk about how misogynistic Goblet of Fire really is. All the movies except Goblet of Fire pass the Bechdel test. And Star Wars, it's about 50-50. And when I say Star Wars, I don't mean the whole entire franchise. I mean specifically the 9 movies that are titled Star Wars blank. Episode blank are the ones that I'm talking about. But with all of that being said, obviously the Bechdel test is very flawed, but I think when something is created from a comic strip that was originally created as a joke, obviously it's going to be very flawed because that person didn't think it all the way through. Because when they created it originally, they didn't think it would have the weight that it has today. So, that being said, there are a plentiful amount of alternatives to the Bechdel test. But one of the most surefire ways of the Bechdel test, or one of the most surefire subsidiaries of the Bechdel test, is actually called the sexy lamp test. And this is a comically named test and is a thought experiment created by a comic book and TV writer, Kelly Sue DeConnick, Captain Marvel. I'm pretty sure she helped write Captain Marvel, if I'm not mistaken. According to her, if you can remove a female character from your plot and replace her with a sexy lamp and your story still works, then you're a hack. You're just putting a woman in there to put a woman in there. These characters are not intrinsic to the narrative, meaning they could easily be removed from the story without making an impact. So, literally, you could replace the female, ew, I hate that I just said the female. You can replace the woman in the film with a inanimate object, therefore a sexy lamp. And your movie will still work all the way through. There won't be any plot holes or anything. So, some movies that fail the sexy lamp test are Batman from 1989, Transformers, and Skyfall. And that was just 3 examples that were given of movies that fail. So this is all coming from an article, these alternatives to the Bechdel test. So that is just the first one that is immediately comparable to the Bechdel test. There's another one. All these other ones, I will start off by saying I am so sorry if I mispronounce them. I have never been good with my words in terms of pronunciation. You can ask anyone who knew me growing up. I was terrible at pronouncing things, even though my last name is literally one of the most difficult last names to pronounce ever, apparently. So, the Duvernay test. The Duvernay test was created by New York Times film critic Manohla Dargis in 2016, and this test evaluates a representation of people of color in the media. Named after director, writer, producer Ava DuVernay, according to Dargis, the test gauges whether African Americans and other minorities have fully realized lives rather than serving as scenery in white stories. So basically, similar to the sexy lamp test. I don't know which one was created first. In all fairness, the Duvernay test was probably created first. But the Duvernay test is very similar to the sexy lamp test, except instead of it being just a woman, it is a person of color. So, movies that pass this are The Color Purple, Daughters of the Dust, Sister Act 2, Belle, which was a 2013 film, and Dear White People. So basically ensuring that persons of color have a fully thought out personality, fully thought out storyline, and are not just there to be your statistic, if you will, in your film. The Vito Russo test, it was developed by GLAAD, GLAAD. The Vito Russo test, named after film historian and GLAAD co-founder Vito Russo, addresses LGBTQ plus representation, and for a production to pass the test, at least one character must be identifiably bisexual, lesbian, gay, and or transgender. This character cannot be solely defined by their sexuality or their gender identity. This character must be an integral to the plot to the extent that if they were removed, it would have significant effect on the story. So movies that pass this are Brokeback Mountain, The Perks of Being a Wallflower, The Intimidation Game, Call Me By Your Name, and Booksmart. So as you can see with all of these newer tests, and when I say newer, I mean newer than the Bechdel test created in 1985, fully acknowledge the flaw that these women these movies that pass the Bechdel test, the women can still not have a character that's fully thought out and developed, if you will. Like, they can literally just be two random women in a bar that are, say, like a Bechdel scene. I don't know if that's actually what it's called in Hollywood, but like where they literally record this one scene just to be able to pass it, if you will. And it does nothing to the plot. It doesn't help progress the movie in any way. Therefore, a very large example of why the Bechdel test is flawed, right? That all these newer alternatives acknowledge as well as challenge more thoroughly film and modern media today. So next is the Mako-Mori test. This test can be seen as the spiritual successor to the Bechdel test and has a more rigorous take on the sexy lamp test. Named after the character Mako-Mori, Rinko Kikuchi from Pacific Rim in 2013, this test was developed in a reaction to the film not passing the Bechdel test despite Mako-Mori being a complex female character. So, in order for a piece of media to pass, it must include one or more female characters. These characters must have their own story arcs, and the story arc shouldn't exist to support a male character's story arc. So, basically a more thought out Bechdel test is literally what they said, and what they acknowledge with the fact that the film that originally didn't pass, you kind of look at it and you're like, but there's nothing anti-feminist about this film, if you will. There's nothing misogynistic about this film. It's just the fact that it didn't pass because it didn't have more than one film, or more than one female, more than one woman. I hate the fact that I'm saying female, and I honestly think it's because whenever I hear female, I immediately feel like it is a man saying it. And I'm I'm going to get so much hate for that statement if it gets clipped anywhere. But when I say that, I mean, I feel like misogynistic and very close-minded men call women females, and it feels very like, not accusatory, but just something about female being called a female versus a woman is something so odd. I'm not sure if anyone else feels that way, but I don't know, just very random and off topic. But anyways, movies that pass the Mako-Mori test is Sister Act, The Craft, Mulan, Spirited Away, and Moana. Wait, I love the fact that Spirited Away Isn't that a movie about a horse? I immediately am thinking Spirit. Spirited Away. No, it's not. I'm gonna look off into the distance as I just failed epically and showed how much of an absolute fool I am for thinking that. Wow, I'm such an idiot. Anyways, we're gonna get over that real quick because otherwise you're just gonna stare at me staring off into the distance. Ooh, this actually looks like a good movie, though. I may have to figure out how to watch it in my free time. During her family's move to the suburbs, a sullen 10-year-old girl wanders into a world ruled by gods, witches, and spirits, a world where humans are changed into beasts. This seems like a pre-ACOTAR movie, if you will. A Court of Thorns and Roses, if you don't know what ACOTAR stands for. Okay. I'm getting so off topic. It does look like a good movie, though. So if you haven't watched that, I recommend it. Just purely based off of that one little one-sentence description. Anyways, it was made in 2001, if that helps you differentiate it between other films. But it was the first one that popped up when I Googled it. So, overall, that is everything I really had planned out, but I also have other thoughts that I just kind of want to leave you with in terms of statistics. So when we talk about all of this, a lot of people like to say, why does it matter? And why does representation matter? And I think that the more you see these reactions of little kids reacting to people who look like them on the screen, to people who may sound like them that have fully thought out characters and character developments and story arcs, they're told that they have more to offer than just being a pretty face or just being a woman or just being a person of color to this world. And that is something very important, I think, especially to see the youth see. Also, it's just cool to see yourself represented in movies properly. As a grown-up. Honestly, I feel like a lot of movies get a lot of hate simply because it doesn't focus on the stereotypical story arc. I don't want to get under fire for saying the original thought that came to my head. But for example, I love the movie Black Widow. I love it. I could watch it over and over and over again. And I think it was done well because I could literally go into a whole entire thesis about why I love the movie Black Widow and how I think it is a great piece of pop culture that was overlooked simply because Black Widow's character was done with in the MCU, and so they kind of went back and did this pre-story, if you will, to introduce a separate character, which obviously was not on anyone directly involved in the film, just on the people who planned out the phases. But I think it was a great film that really paralleled the realism of human trafficking in this world. It made me a good uncomfortable because they literally discussed in great length how these girls were not only taken, they weren't taken from families, but they were taken because they were seen as unvaluable. And to that, I really applaud Marvel, and that's why Black Widow literally stays in my top 10 of all Marvel projects. So with all that being said, though, we have to also look at the numbers of female roles versus the female population. Because if you really start to dive into movies, they're supposed to hold a decent comparison to our modern world. Even fiction, in a sense, can hold a candle to our modern world. So the percentage of female speaking roles declined from 37% to 35% in 2022 to 2023. And the number of female characters in major roles remained at the same of 38%. The percentage of films with female protagonists contracted from 33% in 2022 to 28% in 2023, and this was via San Diego State University. And I think it's also worth noting within that same breath that the entire world has a population of 7.95 billion people, and women account for 3.95 billion, which is 49.6%. So literally just below half, yet they don't have the same statistic for female, women, however you want to say it, roles in Hollywood, even though it's literally almost 50-50. And so it discredits the woman that way. And I'm saying all this, and I am personally wishing that I actually thought this through further and gave other statistics on BIPOC, for example. How BIPOC is represented in film and media versus how many people there actually are BIPOC throughout the whole entire world. And people a part of the LGBTQ community, and how many people are a part of that community versus how they're represented in media. How much they're represented, I should say. And I think when you just apply it to women, it only really pulls back one layer, but this is really a more deep issue than just that. Because it can literally go into a whole entire case of who you are creating the film for. And I actually had this conversation with my cousin because I'll admit I am one of the people who loves the movie Barbie. Do I think it's the greatest thing ever created? No. But I do think it was a great film. That being said, you look and you see who these films are directed by when you're talking about cis, not about people who are a part of the trans community, or are gender fluid for that matter. You're talking about specifically cis men and cis women. And you look and you see when it's directed by a woman for women, when it's directed by a woman for men, when it's directed by a man for men, and when it's directed by a man for women. And you can really tell the difference. And my friend compared this, my cousin compared this to two different movies that have almost the same exact plot. One is Friends with Benefits, and the other is No Strings Attached. One is directed by a woman and one is directed by a man. And she said you can tell without even looking at the director which one was directed by which. And so really just not desensitizing that, and really looking at it and saying, how do you fully think out your female characters? How do you fully think out your BIPOC characters? How do you fully think out your characters who are a part of the LGBTQ community? Do you just put them there for a statistic to help out your case, or do you put them there and actually fully think out their character development? And all that being said, I think it's really important for representation because of the fact that there are people in this world who want to see themselves represented in those movies and in those TV shows and in every single part of media. You should not feel like, you should not feel like you have to be a very specific archetype to be represented in media. And I think that is where this conversation really leads towards. And I think you can really only see, hopefully it only goes up from here in terms of representation in media. And when people say representation doesn't matter, it does. And you're just devaluing other people's experiences by saying that. Because, well, I'm not going to actually fully state that statement because I don't want to become under fire for that. But I was about to let that loose. Anyways, there are a lot of thoughts that I could honestly go on for years in terms of the Bechdel test and how it really started a conversation about representation in media. And a lot of people, to all the people that say it was created as a joke, it takes one match to start a fire. That is all I have to say in response to that. It takes one match to start a fire. Yeah. But anyways, I guess that is how I will conclude this episode. I talked longer than I have in my previous couple. And so no matter where you're watching this, like, comment, subscribe. If you're watching on Spotify, leave a rating, however many stars you want, even though I would love 5. I know I have room to grow. Subscribe, follow, whatever you want to do. But you matter. I love you. And I hope you have a blessed, amazing day, week, month, year, lifetime. And I hope that you see yourself in media today, tomorrow, every day after that, because you matter.